Hello, everyone. I hope you're having a fantastic day. I am. I just want to say that the reason that I haven't uploaded or recorded anything in about 2 weeks, 2 weeks today, is because I've had some nasal congestion. I think I got sick and it just really fucked up my voice. It's still not 100% back to normal, but that's okay. But I just wanted to let everybody know that that's why I've been away for a while. It's not that I've lost interest in recording, or definitely not in you guys, but that's the reason. And today we're actually going to be doing a compilation. I have come to an understanding that a lot of people like these compilations of 30 to 50, sometimes even more, in stories, because of the length of the videos, usually ranging from 2 to 4, sometimes even 5 hours. But a lot of people put them on as background noise, or more so even when they are falling asleep. And, I think that's, I do want to cater towards people that, do listen to it for that specific reason. But, thank you as always. And please don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe. And as always, I hope you enjoy listening to today's stories as much as I did reading them. I was dirtbagging around Western NC and sleeping at campsites a short hike off from the Blue Ridge Parkway. I'm sitting by my fire one night, late, when a guy just steps out of the shadows into the camp and scared the bejesus out of me. He apologized and explained that he got turned around on a hike and was finally back on the right trail, but he was hoping to sleep in my campsite until the morning. I allowed it. Gave him a beer and a brat, and we talked trail. Nothing unusual, and by the time I woke up, he was gone. The next night, I was camped another 20 or 30 miles down the parkway. Late as all hell. I was about to call it a night when guess who showed up? Same dude. Still not super weird or concerning. I was mainly shocked by how fast he seemed to be moving on foot. I figured he either hitched or knew a good shortcut trail. As the crow flies, it would have been only 18 miles or so from the previous night's spot. Not as all inconceivable. The night proceeded about like the last one before it, and by daybreak, he was gone again. This next day, I decided I would hang out around the area and experiment with this guy, just to ease that nagging feeling that I had. I moved literally across the parkway and parked alongside it as always, then started hiking a trail with my pack as normal. This time though, I broke off trail and hid among a rock escarpment, from which I could see my truck and the trail. About an hour later, as dark fell, it all made sense. Headlights. Dude had a vehicle and had been following me, using my truck to locate me. I waited until he had hiked well down the trail, searching for my non-existent campsite before I booked it out. Still not totally convinced he meant me harm. Maybe he just wanted a friend. I don't know. I quickly loaded up and moved again, this time backtracking past the first site mentioned and continued on another 20 miles or so, sitting up late again, making a hobo pie and shooting whiskey. When he showed up the third time, I knew something was off about it. I showed the same hospitality as I had been, but I was more wary of him. It could have easily been a coincidence, us moving in the same direction, me making camps and relaxing all day, while he stacked mileage on the trails, running alongside the parkway. But for him to show up way after I turned and backtracked 50 miles was no coincidence. Sure enough, that night I woke up in my hammock to this guy kissing my neck and ear. I cracked him so hard in the ribs, jumped up, set my Bowie knife to his neck and made threats, something to the effect of cutting his balls off and stuffing them down his throat. I don't remember my exact drunk John Wayne line. I'm a good bit bigger than he was, but I'll give credit for stones or possibly foolhardiness. He made a lunge for my knife, so I tossed it out of reach and grappled him into a choke and cranked down on him till he was unconscious. I tied him up and I just left him there. I slashed 3 of his tires on the way out and I drove my ass out of there. I live in the heart of the largest Ponderosa pine forest in the world. This makes for a beautiful, albeit rugged, wilderness that can shift from pleasant to dangerous, and empty to heavily populated in the blink of an eye. Phoenix and Flagstaff are separated by 100 or so miles of pretty isolated backwoods driving. There is one stretch between communities where there aren't homes or residential areas at all for about 50 of those miles. This is National Forest for outdoor recreation. The only buildings are ranger stations and one space observatory that is pretty far back into the forest. The observatory has many weird legends about it, like being privately owned by the Vatican, which there is some evidence for. My mom was driving between townships in this very isolated span of woodland when she came upon a boy walking down the roadway. He looked to be maybe 15. My mom doesn't stop for people as a general rule, but she turned around and decided to help the kid out. Only when she circled back around did she realize her mistake. The pedestrian wasn't a boy, but a small man, close to her age. He had boyish characteristics, but was dirty and strange. Even his clothes were weird, almost too plain, as if handmade. He tried to get into the car, but my mom kept it locked. She questioned him for a bit and learned he was an android, trying to make his way back to the colony. He explained there was a camp of homeless people, what he called vagrants, that were being reconfigured into androids. These androids weren't allowed to drive or interact with humans as a whole. That was not unless they became separated from the rest of the colony. He wouldn't stand out as strange if not for all the other stories I've heard about this place. A ramshackle place with plywood buildings and other roadside trash coaxed into shelter. Cult and commune are usual labels, and word is they all dress exactly the same. I saw this around 30 or 40 feet off of a hiking trail through a forested area where the entrance to the trail started in a residential neighborhood. The entrance was probably half a kilometer or so from where I saw him. I was on a jog and had started from a different trail entrance and was planning to exit the trail at this other entrance. I had reached a stretch of trail that was pretty steep and rocky, so I started walking down, singing out loud to myself, and I see something move from the corner. When I looked over, it took me a good 10 seconds to make out what I was seeing. It was a man with shoulder length hair, completely naked, facing me and staring at me. Mind you, it was -5 degrees Celsius outside. When I realized what I was seeing, I was pretty alarmed to say the least. For context, I'm a woman and I was 21 years old at the time. I just walked down the slope as quickly as I could, and then I ran out of the trail without looking behind me. Once I was out of the trail, I thought about it, and my alarm changed to concern because, well, it was pretty damn cold out, and this guy was just chilling in the forest, butt naked, and it was starting to get dark. I started to wonder if maybe he was having some sort of mental health crisis, and I ended up calling the police non-emergency line to ask if they could perform a wellness check. The police eventually called me back a couple hours or so after I called them because they couldn't find anyone up there. They wanted to make sure they were checking the right spot, and when they described it, it was 100% the right spot. Never found out who he was or why he was up there. Still wonder about it sometimes though. Not sure if he was a wild man. I suppose it's possible because I know some of the homeless people in that town would set up camp in the bush in the warmer months. He certainly creeped me out though. My friends and I had this hangout spot in the middle of nowhere that we would go and drink or smoke. Called it the tunnel. It wasn't a real tunnel, just a dirt road with tall trees on either side that looked like a tunnel. Anyway, the guys in our friend group would always tell us scary stories that had happened to them while they were there. I just thought they were trying to scare us because every time before this night, nothing creepy had ever happened. We had snuck out, and it was in the middle of the night, probably around 1 or 2 o'clock in the morning. We were drinking and just sitting in the car talking, when suddenly, my friend in the driver's seat whispers, "What's in the middle of the road up there?" I looked and didn't see anything, so I said, "There's nothing in the road. Your eyes are just playing tricks on you." And he insists that, yes, there is something in the road, and the passenger says that he also saw something. I laugh and say, "Bullshit. You guys are just trying to scare us." The driver puts the car into drive and starts slowly rolling forward. Suddenly, a figure emerges from the darkness. It was a man standing right in the middle of the road watching us drive towards him. He had no shoes, had no shirt, and was wearing only shorts. It was a cold fall night, and he was wearing only shorts. This was a dirt road, and he had no shoes on. His eyes were glowing yellow like a deer's eyes would in the headlights. We all start screaming and freaking out. The driver asks if he should stop, and we all yell for him just to drive. The man continues to stare as we are driving towards him. Then, once we only get about 10 feet away from him, he calmly walks to the side of the road and vanishes. This road had tall fences, with even taller willows overgrown over it. It was probably about 10 or 12 feet tall. There's no way a normal man could have just cleared that. I have never seen anyone's eyes glow in headlights before. We were all pretty certain that this man was a skinwalker, as the tunnel was not too far from Skinwalker Ranch. When I was around 7 or 8 years old, I lived a bit north of Spokane, close to a town called Cobert. It was fairly rural and very forested. I remember the neighborhood I lived in was still being developed, and there were lots of trees, lots of dirt, and lots of empty lots yet to be built on. My backyard butted up to a large open field with a very tall power line running as far as the eye could see. On the other side of this field was a huge forest of pine trees. My siblings and I would always go and ride bikes and play back there. Late one fall evening, after my family had eaten dinner, I remember my mom had noticed a fire burning out across the field near the tree line of the forest. She called 911 to report the fire. I remember her getting off the phone and telling us that she said, "Oh, it's probably just someone having a bonfire to burn their leaves. Lots of people do that this time of year. Anyway, we really didn't think much of it after that. A few days later, my sister and I went back there to go play, and we find a completely burnt out car and a bunch of random junk just scattered around the immediate vicinity. Definitely a weird thing to encounter at that age. I also used to ride my bike to school. My elementary school was close enough that I could ride there in about 15 or 20 minutes. Again, my neighborhood was essentially surrounded by pine forests, and I had learned a pretty fun and fast route through the forest, almost directly from my neighborhood to school. One day on my way home from school, I decided to take a trail off my normal route. Don't remember the exact reason. Maybe I was just exploring, or maybe I was just trying to find a shortcut or something. I ended up stumbling upon what appeared to be a makeshift camp of some sort. I just remember seeing a bunch of beer bottles everywhere, and bullet casings and weird cooking equipment, probably meth or maybe moonshine looking back on it, and it looked as if someone had been there very recently, like maybe saw me approaching on my bike and scrambled out of there. For some reason, I just got really bad vibes and didn't hang out around there too long. I remember pedaling out of there as fast as I could. Once I get out of the forest and am turning back onto the main road outside of my neighborhood, I see a white Chevy van turn out of one of those dirt roads from the forest. It was maybe 100 or 150 yards behind me. I hear it accelerating, like a lot. And I'm looking back thinking to myself, this van is accelerating at me. We are heading in the same direction at this point. I start pedaling again as fast as I can. My adrenaline is spiking at this point. This is all happening in the matter of maybe 20 or 30 seconds. I hear the van at this point is so close to me. I end up checking the curb and go flying off my bike, literally over the entire sidewalk, and land in grass pretty much unscathed, albeit extremely shook up. I see the van blast past as I'm still rolling. I get up, run over to my bike, which luckily is also fine, and quickly dip into my neighborhood and ride home, keeping an eye out for that van. I made it home and never saw the van again. I just remember thinking to myself, was that van the person or persons whose camp I stumbled across in the woods? Needless to say, I never went off my normal route to school ever again. Still, to this day, I wonder about who was driving that van and whether or not they were actually trying to hit me or just run me off of the road and scare me. I moved away from that Spokane area in 1997, and it for sure was the weirdest place I ever lived growing up. One year for my birthday, my boyfriend and I went camping deep in the boonies in the West Desert of Utah, a little place called Conger Springs, about 15 miles down a dirt road after you drive, about 60 miles down highway, 50 also known as the loneliest highway in America. It's close to the Nevada border, and there is not a speck of civilization for over 100 miles between Delta. I'm pretty sure it's Elko, Nevada, just way off of the beaten path. I chose this site because you can dig fossil crinoids and horned coral. It's also public land. There are 100+ years of dilapidated shacks and other signs of brave people who long ago tried to homestead in this desolate area. So we hardly see any cars after we head down Highway 50. Don't see anyone else as he takes the dirt road to the spring. As we set up camp near the dilapidated cabins, it is getting dark. Suddenly, a big-ass white truck with several men in it, ranging in age, pull into the camp area and make a slow turnaround, like they were checking us out, and keep driving down the dirt road without saying anything. Usually, it's polite to say howdy when you encounter other people in the boonies. They didn't seem obviously dangerous or malicious, but it absolutely creeped me out and I was unsettled. We kept our heads on a swivel that night, and I didn't sleep well at all, picturing all the awful things that can happen when you encounter crazy people so far from any kind of help. Kept our handguns under our pillows just in case. We don't go into the desert without protection. You never know if you will encounter snakes or crazy people, and usually we do target practice when we are really far from civilization like that. Didn't see the people again till the next day. I was elbow deep in dirt in a dry wash looking for fossils. My boyfriend was 150 feet away at camp reading a book. Suddenly, an old guy I recognized from the white pickup truck comes riding down the wash on a horse. He rode up almost silently because it was soft sand. Didn't hear him till he was like 15 feet away. He definitely snuck up on me, and I was basically alone out of eyeshot from my partner. Luckily, I had my handgun holstered on my hip, which I'm sure he quickly noticed. He said a quick howdy and kept going on his horse. A few minutes later, my boyfriend came to check on me because the cowboy also startled him. We left a few hours later, thankfully, and didn't see them again. It was only a quick one-night camping adventure. We didn't leave because of them, but if we had planned another night there, I honestly would have reconsidered staying because I didn't feel very safe. It was very unsettling. Glad we didn't see any more of those cowboys. My friends and I were driving back from a rave in Denver. We take 287 from Fort Collins to Laramie because it is the quickest way home. 287 is a beautiful drive during the day, but empty and sketchy at night, especially during winter. I was in the back seat and inebriated, so I missed this, but I asked my friend who was in the passenger seat to tell me the main story again. Owl Canyon is a little two-lane detour that I think might have been unpaved at the time. Car on the side of the road, just after the Owl Canyon's so rocky-ass cliffs. Pitch black either side of the road. Dude is just chilling in the middle of the road and it's all black. He's just trying to wave us down. We don't see him till like maybe 20 or 30 feet, and I have to swerve hard to miss him. Don't know why he wanted us to stop, but I don't think it was good. This would have been around 3 a.m. probably, and like I said, it would be pretty empty out there at that hour, so this was pretty weird. The helper in me is like, maybe he was in trouble, but I'm glad my friends have some street smarts, because if he had any bad intentions or some kind of weapon, we would have been fucked. We were all pretty young at that time as well. This isn't as exciting as some of the stories, but I wanted to give you some of my Wyoming flavor. This state is so big and empty, there's no way there's not some backstory creepy stuff that happens all the time here. I lived in southern Delaware, about 13 years in a pretty woodsy area. It was about 15 minutes to the nearest small town and 40 to the nearest small city. My house was surrounded by a nature preserve that allowed hunting by a special permit, and I used to play in those woods for hours as a kid. Part of the nature preserve, about a half a mile away, had a vehicle trail you could go to with your truck, ATV, or whatever type of vehicle you had, and had a few abandoned fields. Occasionally, I'd walk up there by myself just to enjoy nature. One of my favorite areas was an old farming field with a tiny pond surrounded by pine forest. This area is blocked off by large pieces of a concrete fence and is not accessible by vehicle. This is important. I recently revisited the area after not exploring it for about 3 or 4 years and brought my fiance with me. I took her to the area mentioned above, as I used to find cool rocks and sometimes animal bones to take home, since I'm into vulture culture and wanted to show her my favorite childhood quiet area. We started looking for bones and hey, We found some remains of a doe, and more, and another. Altogether, there were the skeletons of around 5 deers, some bucks, some does. Now, while hunting is allowed in parts of the preserve, it is not in this area. Also, when you hunt, you are required to field dress, remove organs in the area of death, and take the rest of the carcass with you, as most hunters around there hunt for food. These were not full skeletons, just bits and pieces. We found 3 partial skulls, so it wasn't just trophy hunters taking down a buck or doe for a mount, and the remains were in about 6 foot of a radius. If it was hunters, they'd have to take the entire carcass with them by walking the mile back to the main trail, clean and butcher the deer elsewhere, then return and carry the butchered remains back to the area and dump it in one specific point, and also not dump the entire skeleton. We're a bit freaked out at this point, and then we realize that the forest is almost entirely quiet, except a few quail calls. And as a kid, I used to hear train whistles in this area. There are no trains in the area, except some cargo rails that ran 3 or 4 times a year about 15 miles away, and remembered the silence that came after those calls. We're thoroughly creeped out by all the weird bone area and the unusual silence, so we speed walked back to the vehicle trail, got in my car, and drove back to my family's house. We don't plan to go back. The Okefenokee Swamp is located mostly in South Georgia and partly in North Florida. I'd been going there since I was a kid. My dad and uncle were avid outdoorsmen. They were always canoeing, hiking, hunting, fishing, etc. And I grew up learning to love the same things. Now, if the first thing that came to your mind when I said swamp was alligators, you would be correct. And the Okefenokee has some of the biggest around. It may sound super scary to non-Southerners, but the old saying really is true. If you leave them alone, they'll leave you alone. Canoeing slowly across the dark tea-colored waters. If you pass too closely to one, it'll quietly sink into the murky depths. He's not coming to get you. You've simply interrupted his sunbathing. As elementary school kids in South Georgia, it was kind of a rite of passage to go on the Okefenokee field trip and be led on a guided tour by Okefenokee Joe. Joe was a true outdoorsman, extremely knowledgeable, friendly, good with the kids, and funny. A little strange, but generally regarded as a good guy. A local legend. He would get that bow closer to the big gators than my dad ever let me get. He taught us kids all about them. We even got to hear the mating call of some of the males and watch a lot of their behavior up close. He would also show us all the birds, snakes, and other wildlife. The swamp's residents were so used to Joe's bow that they didn't flee when he got close. Great memories. Anyhow, fast forward to my adulthood, and I still have a great love for the outdoors. I'd recently gotten married and was successfully getting my wife and stepdaughter into kayaking, camping, and hiking. I'd broken them in fairly easy. Calm lakes and beautiful crystal clear blue spring-fed Florida waterways. We'd encountered some gators, but the girls had already become comfortable with the fact that they don't want to hurt humans. I decided it was time to go out of the Okefenokee and show them my childhood swamp stomping grounds. We headed out one weekend, kind of on a whim. I hadn't called ahead to reserve a campsite because I assumed it wouldn't be that busy yet. Well, I was wrong. Every tent camping site was booked. I was pretty visibly bummed out, so I guess the ranger felt sorry for me. She told us to hold on. She was going to check one more thing. When she came back, she had great news. there was a primitive group site available. If you aren't familiar, these are larger area sites that are usually for big groups like Boy Scouts, usually situated away from the main campground areas. They do not have electricity. We camp 100% primitive all the time, so this wasn't an issue for us at all. The ranger explained that this particular group site had been closed for 2 seasons due to the road being washed out. She said they had just fixed the road the week before, but hadn't gone around to relisting the site as available. She offered to sell it to us for a normal fee instead of the group fee. Deal. We pay and she vaguely shows us on the map how to get to our home for the night. I remember thinking, damn, that's far as hell from all the other sites. It's gonna be nice and quiet. Perfect. While at the office, we learned that the evening there was going to be a ranger-guided night paddle. This particular park inside the Okefenokee is a designated dark sky park, meaning there's very little light pollution. I was already excited about showing my family the stars and Milky Way. So getting out onto the water at night and seeing the skies that way sounded sweet. We decided to sign up for the night paddle and then headed off to find our campsite. When we got there, you could tell right away that the area hadn't been used in several years. Overgrown, spider webs everywhere, teeming with the usual wildlife. I kind of prefer things this way, so I didn't think twice about it. It was so far from the campgrounds and the main office area, you couldn't hear a single sound of humans or vehicles. The area was large, so I walked around a bit to find a good spot to set up. I looked back at my map to try to gauge exactly how this little island was shaped, and noticed that what I was seeing and what the map showed didn't quite line up. Whatever. I'm sure I'm just reading it wrong. We set up our camp and just enjoyed the sunshine and the sounds of nature. It was still very early spring, so the hordes of mosquitoes and various other swamp bugs weren't out in full force yet. The bugs in the swamp and the summer moths could be a horror story of their own. Around 7:30 p.m., we loaded the kayaks back into the pickup and headed all the way across the park to the launch area, as our guided paddle was supposed to start at 8. We approached the launch area to unload, and there was a good 15 or 20 other people going on the paddle, led by a young enthusiastic ranger. We all slipped off into the water, with our headlamps on the red light setting. We exit the small canal we had been traveling in and emerged out into a larger river-type waterway that meandered through the swamp. As we slowly and quietly creeped along, cypress trees draped with Spanish moss looming over us on both sides, with a dramatic orange and pink sunset as their backdrop. The sun finally began disappearing and the stars started to come out. It was absolutely stunning, and still one of my favorite kayaking memories. I'd never actually seen the Milky Way like that before. It was a new moon night, dark as could be. About a mile from our original launch, we all congregated out in the middle of the wide waterway and sat completely still and quiet. The motionless, dark waters of the swamp reflected the skies like a mirror. Thousands of stars and galaxies twinkled above us and below us. It was like being in space. Shooting stars were visible every few minutes. It really was magical. The only artificial light in the sky was the dull glow of Jacksonville, Florida on the horizon, which was about 100 miles to our southeast. After a while, the ranger snapped all of us out of our trances. It was time to head back. When we were paddling out there, it had been dusk/twilight for most of the trip. Not much light, but enough to kind of silhouette the trees and branches against the sky, and a slight glimmer on the water. By now it was pitch black, and I do mean pitch black. The ranger told us to switch our headlamps back on, to the normal white light setting so that we could all see well enough to navigate out of the swamp. As each headlamp slowly switched on and the swamp was illuminated, we were met with hundreds of glowing eyes. Hundreds. I swear to you, now, as I said it earlier, I grew up out here. Gators were nothing new or scary to me at all. However, growing up, we never really stayed out on the water past dark. We would shine our lights out over the water to look at all the eyes, but from dry land, far away from the beasts. Now, I found myself and my little family quite literally pushing past floating gators with our kayaks. They were absolutely everywhere, all over the sides of the channel, as well as blocking our way in the center. The ranger was leading and assured everyone not to worry. He paddled up towards a huge group of shining eyes ahead of us and pushed right through them. Most of the eyes just disappeared under the water, but the gator directly in the ranger's path thrashed, and his tail actually hit the kayak. Holy shit. Sharp gasps from the group pierced the otherwise quiet southern night air, but the ranger showed zero signs of panic, which was reassuring. We all just trusted the young man that we weren't going to royally piss off these things by kayaking straight into them. As we went along, the sounds of gators being bumped by kayaks and thrashing were heard every couple minutes. There weren't any other jarring sounds or movements, just the constant calling of frogs, cicadas, and the splashing of disturbed dinosaurs. When we finally turned back into the small channel that led to the launch, there were no more glowing eyes. I'd be lying if I said I hadn't been a bit freaked out, but I can honestly say I wasn't panicking. The ranger being so cool and confident while leading the way made it pretty easy to stay calm. Everyone started to relax again as we neared the launch, and we all got out, loaded up our boats, and one by one headed back to our camps. There was a line of red tail lights trailing off toward the main campground, while my wife, daughter, and myself split off, alone, into the darkness towards the other side of the park where the site was. I do remember that feeling kind of eerie, but everyone had made it through the gator gauntlet safely with no problems. Now we were laughing about it and remarking on how cool the whole experience was. We were in high spirits, no stress, but we had no idea of the terror that would come later in the night. We finally got back to our side around midnight, and we were starving. I got a nice fire going while my wife prepped dinner. The meal finished cooking around 1 a.m., and we finally all settled down to get comfy by the fire and eat. I hadn't taken 2 bites of my food when the horrifying experience began. The cicadas and frogs were singing, but you tend to drown that out into the background noise because it's so constant. Suddenly, out of the calming buzz of their singing, sprung a sound that I will never forget. A low, rumbling, guttural growl, long, deep, vibrating in our chests. We all froze and looked at each other like, did y'all just hear that shit? Not even 10 seconds later, we hear it again. Yes, we all definitely fucking heard that shit. It sounded close. Really close. Like right on the other side of the brush we were camped near. The only thing I could honestly relate it to at the time was the growling sound the T-Rex makes in Jurassic Park. I was terrified. I've been scared in the woods and swamps. I've seen swamp gas, freaky figures, heard screams. I've been in the Marine Corps. I've encountered bears in the Appalachian Mountains. I've explored and experienced all kinds of places. When I tell you I have never been this scared, I mean it. Pure, raw, primordial fear. I immediately told the girls to get into the cab of my pickup. They get into the truck, and I hop into the bed of the truck with my little .357 Magnum drawn. I figured being back there would get me up off of the ground, and give me a little advantage over whatever was coming. I told the girls to lock the doors and open the little sliding back window so we could communicate. I start frantically shining my flashlight around, aiming my gun along with it. I absolutely see nothing. We continue to hear the growling coming from one general direction, not getting any softer or louder, just continuously emitting in 3 to 5 second long intervals, every 30 seconds or so. It was coming from the brush right next to our site. I shine my light all over that area, but I see nothing, just thick palmetto leaves, underbrush and pine, no movement whatsoever. Then, suddenly, we hear the sound coming from the complete opposite direction, more towards the open area of the site. I whip around and shine my light that way. That's when I noticed the dense fog that had settled into the entire area. It was a damp, sticky, suffocating fog. Almost right away, the growling sound was coming back from the original direction. I whip around, but immediately I hear it again behind me. That's when I realized there were two of them, doing a kind of call and answer with each other. It's also when I realized that the other sounds of the swamp had gone silent. Nothing but the call and answer of whatever was making these absolutely gut-wrenching sounds. It got deafeningly quiet for a moment, but nothing was the heavy fog which seemed to have a silent sound of its own. My wife, with a shaky, trembling voice, told me she wanted to leave immediately, that our daughter agreed. Now, I was absolutely terrified. Do not misunderstand this. However, the thought of just leaving all of my expensive camping gear behind was somehow more offensive. Not to mention, I was getting kind of frustrated. I am at home in this damp swamp. I know all of the creatures here. I'm comfortable here. It's borderline pissing me off that something out there was so scared and confused. I was trying to rationalize what could be making this sound. Suddenly, it started back up again, but now it sounds like there could be 4 or 5 of them, all growling back and forth to each other, overlapping each other now, coming from all sides, a demonic chorus of deep, rattling, soul-sucking rumbles, not getting any closer or farther away, just keeping us closely surrounded. If I'd had to shit, I believe I would have shat myself. I kept myself at least somewhat cool by affirming that it must be animals of some kind. I would have even entertained the thought of anything supernatural or cryptid. My wife kept saying it sounded like a big cat, and while I agreed, I knew that just wasn't it. It would have had to have been massive lions or tigers to make that kind of extremely low rumbling growl. Impossible. I wrecked my brain for the biggest animal it could possibly be, and I just kept landing on alligator. Yet, we had just paddled directly through an entire swarm of them, some of them absolutely massive, and they hadn't made a single sound the whole time we were out there on the water. No, that couldn't be it. I even had a thought that the young, playful ranger had somehow orchestrated some kind of extravagant practical joke on us poor campers out here all alone. Really and truly, I had no fucking idea what it was, and not being able to even see a glimpse so I could take a shot at it to protect my family was a very helpless feeling. I really wish I had more words on how I felt, just blindly standing in the back of the truck, hearing what I could only imagine were the scariest, evilest, most vile things on the planet, just knowing that they wanted to kill, eat, or otherwise mutilate myself and my family. It felt like an eternity, but we'd finally only been holed up in my truck for about 10 or 15 minutes by now. It had finally gone quiet again, and I told the girls that we could leave, but I'm not leaving the gear. I climbed into the cab and started the truck and moved it, positioning it to where I could shine the headlights onto our stuff while I packed up all the gear. Gun in hand, I began rolling up the tent, gathering all of our crap and throwing it into the bed of the truck, praying nothing crazy happened like my truck dying or some other perfectly timed cinematic horror moment. I tried to put on a confident air so as not to scare my family, but in my head I felt so fucking vulnerable, like I was something's prey. The growling still hadn't come back, but honestly, the silence was freaking me out more than anything. And the fog. I'll never forget how oppressive that fog felt. All of our gear was sopping wet with it, and I swear, it was hard to breathe the air. The fire was nothing but a smolder despite the fact that it had been roaring and bright 20 minutes ago. Just as I was rolling up the very last sleeping mat, one final, closer than before, a growl shook me to my core. I snatched the mat up and took off running, getting into the truck Dukes of Hazzard style and taking the fuck off. None of us looked back. During the fires that consumed Mount Charleston, Nevada, my parents drove out to the mountain when the roads were clear. They described the wildlife to be running around the car as they drove through the open road. My dad told my mom to stop the car, and he got out and started walking through the desert. He realized that the wilderness is running, including snakes and other deadly animals. He witnesses a moose or an elk in the distance that was looking at him, but walked off in the direction of the rabbits and the other wildlife. As he gets in the vehicle, both my parents and his father described seeing a tall man crouched down in front of the car, wings draped over his back. As he stands and faces them, his wingspan wide enough to cover the entire 2-lane road lifted him off the ground in 4 swooshes. They described him as muscular, broad shoulders, arms and legs, but the face was mesmerizing. They couldn't describe his face, but it was not a human. It sounds like a man-bird. The Mothman was a topic of discussion for them to decide if it was the Mothman or not. If anyone has any similar stories about this creature, please share them with me. I want to understand what they saw. This happened in October of 2020 in Pelham and Helena in Alabama, as I live near the border of the 2 towns and followed it into Helena from Pelham. This is a long story, but I want it to be detailed as possible. However, my interaction with this thing was over an hour and a half and a lot to talk about. It's been bugging me a long time, and as much as I try to rationalize what happened, I can't. So I will try my best to tell my story and hope someone will maybe have had a similar indecency happen to them, and I will be able to get a better understanding of this. On with what happened, I am living with my girlfriend in Pelham, Alabama. We live together in a development. We were doing our regular thing, playing video games, relaxing, late around 1 a.m. Can't get the exact dates and times if anyone's interested. Anyway, I go outside to smoke a cigarette and I hear a woman yell. As I live in a development, I think nothing of it, but it continues and I become curious as the yelling continues. Over 5 minutes, and I become a little concerned. So I start to pay closer attention to it, and I believe the yelling is coming across the main road near my development in a small patch of woods. So now I'm thinking it may be a fox, as they make a almost identical sound to a woman, and thought, okay, cool, it's just a fox. But it continues to scream, "Somebody help me," clearly. I am not trying to approach it anymore, and just almost try to make sure I'm hearing this thing right. Then it screams, "Please help," again, and again. This is clear, and I'm sure now that this is not a fox. I approach closer because I think someone needs help, but the screams are moving away from me, out of the small patch of forest next to the road. Down the road about 50 yards to another development across the street. I enter the development, and now I'm 90% sure this is someone's TV. or someone has a Halloween decoration that is making this noise. But it bothers me that I thought I was standing right next to where I heard it originally. I am now walking in this development. I text my girlfriend about what happened just in case someone did need help, but it was probably nothing. I'm trying to follow this screaming as it continues, almost 2 or 3 times a minute, always the same phrases. Please help me. As I am walking down the road, it seems more difficult to follow, and it seems to be coming from much further away now, so I decided to just go home. If someone needed my help, I thought, why would they be running so fast? As they would have to be to cover the distances. As I am walking back home after 4 or 5 minutes, it then starts again, much more loudly. And I now have a much better idea that this is coming from this larger forest near a cell phone tower. I am now hearing the screams in the woods about 50 yards from me, in those same woods. I am standing on the street, and as I am listening to this, I notice that it is moving quickly parallel to me. It moves 50 yards to my right, stops, screams help, then runs about another 50 yards to my left. And I am baffled that anyone could move so quickly, and this went on for another 5 minutes. It only stopped to speak and ran again, and this didn't make any sense to me anyway. I wasn't sure to enter the forest and try to help this person, but I still couldn't see it, almost as if it was crawling, as I saw the bushes moving and heard the twigs snapping and the screaming. Then it screamed a different phrase. Over and over it screamed, "Why aren't you helping me?" It did this rapidly for almost about 2 minutes. Then it made a different noise. It started making a very low, almost grunting, growling noise. This is when I became terrified. I couldn't rationalize this. I am hearing the woman screaming and this low grunting, growling noise over and over. I realize this isn't my imagination. This is insane. I then realized how far I am from my house and how long this had been going on for, and everything almost came together. This thing wants me to come out into the forest. It isn't running back and forth at a 50-yard distance anymore. It's almost running back and forth 20 yards, and very close to me, about 10. It refuses almost to leave the woods, but wants me very badly to come into those woods. The grunting becomes way more frequent along with its movements, almost running faster and faster back and forth. I think I see something low to the ground, possibly white. It's hard to tell, and it's moving quick. I am almost scared so much, so I tried to go to the camera button on my phone, but I couldn't find it, and that grunting was terrifying. I stopped and decided to call 911 immediately. I know whatever this thing is isn't friendly, and it's wanting me in those woods for whatever reason. I never heard of this happening to anyone, and that's not good because that tells me that this thing probably doesn't leave anyone alive it hunts, and I was in trouble. I tell the operator where I am, and that a woman is screaming. Once the Helena police show up, all of a sudden, it just stops, and we never heard that same sound again. So, just some background before getting into my experiences. I've been practicing astral projection for the past 23 years. So one morning, I floated out of my body, and there were several aliens standing around me. And I'll be honest, they were creepy. Pretty sinister vibes. The energy of individuals and entities is something you can easily pick up while out of body. And I actually picked up on their energy before even seeing who or what they were, before even being able to see my environment. As I was shifting out of body, I felt their presence and felt their unique energy signature. So these aliens would make regular appearances for quite some time. And when I say aliens, I simply mean entities that look like traditional aliens. Big, black, slanted eyes, triangular shaped heads, small, skinny bodies. They would affect me with this energy that felt almost artificial in nature, and it had a paralyzing effect on me. They would pull me out of my body without my permission or any intent to leave my body. I've had more strange experiences with these guys than I can fit into a book. I've encountered many different groups or types of aliens during my out-of-body experiences, but I'm talking about one group in particular. They looked like the Greys, but had light orange skin. I've had more encounters with this group by far, and they seem to be lower frequency compared to some of the other groups, some of which I've had rather enlightening and profound experiences with. So, the first thing I know about these entities is that they operate in the astral dimensions. They can be found in higher dimensions, and sometimes they actually find you there, especially if you practice astral projection. Many alleged alien abductions seem to actually be cases of people being taken out of their bodies by these aliens and mistaking it for a physical reality experience. Don't get me wrong, both are genuine experiences. They just take place on a different plane of reality. Although, I'm certain that many abductions are physical experiences. This happened to my mom when she was between 15 and 18 years old. We narrowed the years down by knowing it was before Chernobyl, but after her youngest sister was born. This occurred near the family farm. She was outside and noticed what looked like a giant dragonfly, a thin body of length of about 20 centimeters, sitting on a tree branch about 5 meters away. Its eyes were approximately the size of avocado seeds, if not slightly smaller. The 4 wings were see-through, and the body was brown with yellow stripes. The tail was bent while resting, hanging down from the tree branch. She never had seen anything like it, and her earliest accounts to me described it as a mutated dragonfly. Eventually, this giant dragonfly turned its head, and when it noticed my mom observing it, it stared at her. But she noticed that it had an intelligent look. She said a dog can sometimes have intelligent expressions that give a sense of understanding, but this was a much bigger feeling or sense. Unlike anything she has ever seen in any other animal, she felt the dragonfly truly understood her, and she felt its presence. She felt as if it had a soul. She was slightly overwhelmed, and she felt as if she had gained knowledge that she wasn't able to recall. The giant dragonfly sensed this. It knew my mom saw beyond it just being an insect, and so after only staring at her standing still for about 5 seconds, it quickly flew away. However, it was much faster than usual. She recalls that she could only follow it flying away with her eyes for a second until it disappeared, not going out of view, but completely disappeared, as if it teleported or just went invisible. This is an encounter that my mother and my uncle experienced as kids in the 1970s. When I was younger, my mom and my uncle would tell this story to us, and I always thought it was a ghost story. But recently I've been thinking it was an encounter. Please let me know if you've had a similar experience, and if you believe their story was an encounter as well. My mom lived with her older sister, older brother, and mom in a very old apartment complex. The complex was owned by my mother's aunt, but my grandma would run to it to make money. The apartment complex was pretty large, and the only bathroom they had was pretty far away from where they would sleep. My grandma took over a couple of the rooms on the side of the complex, since they weren't being rented. There were around 3 to 4 rooms, and they were being used as storage. One room was a bedroom, and my mom couldn't recall what the other rooms had. In an actual apartment that was next to those rooms, they had a kitchen, a TV, and a room where they all slept together. Because the building was pretty old, most of the rooms didn't have any light. But the actual apartment did. Since the bathroom was really far away from my grandma, we would have to have my mom and her brother bring a bucket at night. But since back then there was barely any lights, the nights would be very dark and it would make my uncle and my mom super nervous. They would have to carry a cable light with them. So then one night, again, my grandma forced them to go get the bucket, and they both nervously hurried to go get it while carrying the cable light. They got the bucket out of the room, and as they were heading back, my uncle noticed a fire light in the patio and immediately shields my mom and starts shaking. My mom, confused, tries to see what it was. The way she described it, it was like a fire, like projection, but not red, more like a wider fire. They both try to run and try to go back to the main apartment, but her older sister locked the door behind them as they left. My uncle, out of fear, takes off, leaving my mom behind. My mom was so scared. Out of shock and fear, she falls to the floor and observed a shadow creature running out of the light. She described this creature around a kid size. She noticed its eyes, but she said although they were bigger, they weren't exaggerated, just bigger. For the color, she said it was like a grayish, translucent color. My uncle, as he was running out, trips over a stair and then watched the shadow run out until it disappeared. Once my mom's sister finally let them in, they wouldn't stop crying. They couldn't sleep or talk. They were traumatized for years. My grandma would try to make them explain. Other people believed that my grandma needed to dig a hole on the patio because the shadowy creature might have let them know there's treasure. My grandma believed that if she dug a hole, she would find something bad. For a while, my mom and her brother weren't the same. And then when they finally were able to talk about it, my mom realized it wasn't her imagination. I think this story is really interesting because usually an experience like this happens to only one person, but 2 people at the same time. Perhaps they really did see the shadowy, gray-like creature. I have lived in 2 houses here in Sweden since I moved there in 2006. There is the one that I currently live in now, and the one I lived in for the first 12 years I lived in Sweden. In the last post I made about the last house, I talked about the footsteps that I experienced. Today will be the only visual I ever had while living in that house. Now, to point out, I didn't experience much activity when I visited the house prior to moving to Sweden in 2006. I didn't experience much even after I moved into that house. It wasn't until about 7 years later that I began to experience activity, because that is when my first kid was born. 18 months later, my second child was born. There's a theory that children can cause paranormal activity, and that's because they have loads of energy, which spirits need to help them manifest. A quick background. This last house we lived in had been my significant other's grandfather's house. My significant other inherited the house after his grandfather died. By the way, his grandfather died in the house as well as the first owner of the house. They both died in their sleep though when they were over 90. And thus begins my experience. It was 4:30 in the morning. There were 3 bedrooms in the house, 2 downstairs and 1 upstairs. The one downstairs was for the kids, and the other was for us. And the one upstairs had been reserved as a guest house. However, the kids and I would sometimes sleep up in that room because it was freezing downstairs. We had a pellet burner, and sometimes the damn thing didn't work right, or it ran out of pellets, which I would fill up in the morning, as I would have left up to 6-kilogram bags of pellets, go down the stairs to the basement with weak lighting and no railing, which was a safer thing to do in the morning than night. So that would be the reason why the downstairs would be freezing more than the upstairs. Upstairs was a little bit more warmer. Towards the last few months of us living in that house, my significant other would sleep in the guest house, so he wouldn't disturb us when he got up to go to work in the morning, which was early. At the time, he worked at a company that was an hour away from where we lived. This would be the reason we would eventually move to the area we live at now. But then, he would wake up early and leave around 4:30 a.m. to go to work where he had to be there by 6 a.m. He would give himself an hour to chill out and shower at his job, since a lot of companies have had showers to use, especially if they were at a factory. However, sometimes he would come up and say goodbye to me just before he was leaving. So one early morning, I awoke to a shadow of someone standing over my bed. I thought initially it was my significant other. I reached up to give him a hug and a kiss. However, as I was reaching up, I noticed that the shadow was taller than my significant other. He is about 5'4" to give you an idea. This shadow was at least 6 feet tall. Suddenly, I thought it was a home intruder, so I gave it a punch. My hand went right through it. Not only does my hand go through it, but the shadow disappears just as my fist went through it. Oddly enough, I don't recall feeling anything like coldness as I did that. Had this been an honest-to-God person, I would have saw them making a run to the door as they escaped, or my fist would have made contact, not vanish. The shadow itself didn't have any features. It reminds me of the face they have on mannequins. After this happened, I shook my head and went, ugh, ghosties are at it again, and went back to sleep immediately. I have to disclaim that I have a pretty weird reaction to paranormal activity and ghosts in general. I can sense their presence, even when they aren't doing anything like moving stuff or footsteps. So when they do something like that or what they just did here, I'm not surprised by it. I just mutter, ghosties or ghosts are at it again, and go about my day. However, the irony of me seeing that shadow person in that room, that's the room where my significant other's grandfather died in. So I've seen the shadows my whole life, and I've never been afraid of them. It's gotten more and more common over the past year or so since I've gotten into lucid dreaming. I've never seen the red shadows before until the other day. I was driving home after dropping my girl off at the house and was seeing them on the side of the road. I was drowsy when one seemed to come flying at me from the middle of the road. It turned into like a red fog and almost seemed angry. When I first saw it, it was in the middle of the road, and when it turned red, it rushed toward me and it hit me with a huge rush of fear. Like I said, I've seen the shadows for a long time, but never this. Can someone please explain the best you can what I did to make it so angry? I should also add, when I looked into the red shadows, nothing would show up, not even someone's attempt at drawing it. So the story I saw last night helped to ensure I wasn't insane. I saw a shadow figure for the third time in my life. I was walking home to get my VR headset, and on the way back I felt that something was watching me. And I looked back and I saw a big, tall, really dark-looking guy. I could not see his face, and I've seen the same guy 2 times before. One time was outside, and one was when I was sleeping. I woke up to it watching me. That was also the first time. I also got chills for 20 minutes after that. I think it's my guardian angel or something like that since I saw it for about 4 years. And I know it's the same one because I somehow recognize it, even though I'm not even sure that that is what it was. The first time I saw it, I got so scared. I didn't even want to move, but I had to. I just went underneath my blanket. The figure was like 3 times my size, and it had a top hat. I started to see them when I was trying to teach myself to astral project. I was in junior high. I had failed attempts as well as I was stricken with panic. When I opened my eyes, I saw various humanoid shadows around the room, but they quickly vanished. Ever since, I will randomly see them, especially if I start to panic. Fast forward to a night where I was lying in bed with all the lights on. The dark made me panic and I would see them sometimes. I also would get several nightmares a night, every night, and wanted it to be well lit when I woke up from them. The past few weeks, I was always getting into bad arguments with my family. As I'm reading a book, I noticed one standing by the door. I had the thought that maybe this thing was the reason for the bad vibes and arguments that were going on. So I started to talk to it, being firm, direct, but also polite, asking it to leave. That's when it seemed to form yellow eyes, and the form turned red, like a red mist instead of being made of darkness. It then flew towards me in a beeline, almost like bad CGI. Laughable how it looked now, looking back. And as it crashed into me, all I could see was red in my vision. Then it was gone. I still see them during times of panic, but will go long periods of time where I don't see them. Not from a lack of thinking about them. Maybe I am insane. Someone, please let me know what you think. Ever since primary school, I've had this weird feeling of being constantly watched. Not in the, oh, the government is watching me or anything, but just this off feeling whenever my blinds are open or my door is open slightly, and it all started in year 4. Specifically, so I was like 8 or 9 years old. Recently, and I say recently, but I mean in the past year, I've been actually seeing a shadow-like figure standing around my room, usually at my door, behind my door, or in the crack of it. And this has always freaked me out. Earlier today, like 10 minutes ago, I saw a figure standing just behind my door. My door is open. It was standing right where the door meets the wall, so where the hinges are. I shined my flashlight on where it was, and it wasn't there. So I moved my light and went back to what I was doing, and then saw it again. I shined my light there again, but nothing. So I went back to what I was doing. Then out of nowhere, I saw something in a crawling position right next to my bed. It was almost clear as day, so I have now simply turned my damn light on. Before today, I have seen it only a couple of times. Most notably was when I was coming out of the toilet and seeing it crouched outside my room door as if it was waiting for me to come out of my room. Another instance of me seeing things is I have a black cat called Magic. He follows me around sometimes, and when I was on my way to or from school, coming or going down my driveway, I thought I saw him run past me. I look over as it happened and nothing was there. You could say maybe he just jumped on a fence or ran really fast, but I was watching. The instant I turned around, whatever it was just simply gone. Recently, the tap has started making noises. It sounds like it's screaming when it was turned off. Our fridge also sounds like someone is trapped inside it, sometimes making a screaming noise. Maybe I'm just paranoid, but this shit freaks me out, and I cannot sleep at most nights. This started in my childhood, around 3rd grade, and continued until I went to college. We moved into a duplex in a new town. The other half of the duplex was rented out, and there was tons of times when the other half was not occupied. I heard noises, footsteps primarily. I seemed to be the only one to hear them. As I got older and started staying home alone after school, I would hear footsteps come up the stairs, around the corner, and cross my bedroom to the closet with the attic. It was unnerving, but not scary or malevolent. My mom and brother never believed me, so I stopped telling them. One night in high school, I fell asleep on the couch watching SNL. I woke up, turned off the TV, and started walking up the stairs. I turned and a figure in a hat was sitting on the couch. It calmly pointed to the light that was right next to him. I said, "Thanks," and walked back down the stairs. Went right next to him and turned the light off. I was nearly all the way up the stairs before I was awake enough to process what had happened, and I completely freaked out. I woke my mom up and slept in bed with her that night. She was convinced that it was just a night terror of some kind. It was not. I left for college and a new owner updated the house. The other half was empty, so they did that first. Then they just had my mom move to the new half while they redid our half. Once they were done, a new tenant took over, a couple and their friend. Not long after, the friend started telling the couple about what she was seeing and hearing. The guy was laughing and telling my brother. He let the guy know that what she was saying is exactly what I said for years. When I came home from college, we compared notes and they were identical. My mom and brother believed me, but still never had their own encounter. I never saw it again after leaving that half of the duplex, and I never heard him walking again. About 7 or 8 years ago, I was lying in bed after taking some Ambien. Not a very high dosage, maybe 10 milligrams, as I had been struggling with insomnia since my best friend had passed away when I was 18. I was about 21 or 22 at the time. I was lying in bed struggling to fall asleep, and for some reason decided to stop trying. I was just lying there in bed for a while, wide awake but definitely in a type of altered state after about an hour and a half after taking the Ambien. I remember starting to feel somewhat afraid and almost vulnerable, like I knew taking Ambien and not sleeping wasn't a good idea, but I definitely wouldn't be able to sleep, so I felt kinda doomed, like I was about to have a bad trip or something. The next thing I know, there is someone standing in the doorway of my room. It was a very tall man wearing, you guessed it, a fedora, bowler hat type, and a long trench coat. I remember he reminded me of some kind of jazz musician. He was standing against my door, very cool and casually staring right at me. I remember wondering if his skin was red. I thought maybe I was hallucinating, but it wasn't really clear. I do remember he had a wicked smile though, and with his evil-looking eyes, I was certain it was Satan. But not scary demonoid Satan, like an artist's interpretation. He stared at me for a good while, and while I was scared, I didn't feel threatened. I don't remember what happened next. I think I just slept on the couch that night, but especially after taking Ambien, I'm not surprised I don't remember much else from that night. And I never saw him again. But for years, I was certain this was just something that I had hallucinated, which also would have been the first and only time that ever happened. Never took acid or tripped before either. Fast forward to today, I watched a video on YouTube about the Hat Man and the Benadryl challenge. The thumbnail alone gave me chills, as it was exactly what I had seen, albeit with a wider brimmed hat. After watching the video, I realize now I probably wasn't hallucinating at all, and maybe have really seen the Hat Man or Satan himself. After watching the video, I had to find some outlet to share this experience, and found this subreddit. Already, I am thoroughly disturbed by some stories here, but what are the odds millions around the globe just happen to have the same experience? To me, that's the scariest part. There's almost no chance it's just a coincidence. A few years ago, I had the most horrific experience of my life. I read a lot of these experiences on here, but nobody seems to be afraid or affected by them like I was. I woke up at around 4 a.m. laying on my bed with only my eyes open. I was completely paralyzed. I could not move a muscle. My room had a door that split in half. I don't know what you call that, as it is a Dutch-style door. Anyhow, as soon as I laid my eyes on the door, it split open, and I could see tons of shadow people slowly making their way into my room. Very slowly they made their way in, but it sounded like hundreds of people murmuring. It sounded like hundreds of people all in one room talking in a low voice. All the while they were making their way into my room, very slowly. I was absolutely frightened and shocked beyond belief. I tried my best to jump up out of bed and just run, but I was completely frozen. After what seemed like an eternity, I gained my strength back and they slowly retreated. When I could finally get up out of bed, I ran out of the room and turned on all of the lights in the house. That's my story, and that's all I can remember from it. There is a little hot springs nestled near the peak of the Passamaquoddy Pass in central Idaho, though it is hidden in plain sight. Sitting quite literally on the shoulder of the road, it is not well known as an attraction outside of the valley, but the local ranchers are quite familiar with Barney Hot Springs. It's not unusual to drive by it on the weekends and see several families enjoying the water. Barney Hot Springs, or simply Barney's, is incredibly remote, even for Idaho standards. It's at least an hour of driving, over rutty, dirty roads, to the small town of Salmon in the north. If you need a hospital, it's over 2 hours to the regional hospital in Ohio Falls, and that's in the south. To say you're in the middle of nowhere at Barney's is an understatement. But the seclusion is one of Barney's major drawing points. That, and the odd abundance of tropical fish swimming in the year-round warm waters. You can sit back, relax, and take in the surrounding views of the mighty Rocky Mountains with little in the way of distraction. But Barney's isn't at all it seems to be on the surface. An event 40 years ago turned this little hot spring from a local retreat to a local nightmare. On the afternoon of October 27th, 2 truckers stopped for fuel on my parents' gas station and cafe in Howell, Idaho. They were hauling a load of hay over the Passamaquoddy Pass, headed for the delivery point somewhere in Utah. As the truck fueled, the 2 men settled down at the cafe counter and ordered coffee. Sipping his coffee, the older trucker struck up a conversation with my mother and the regulars in the cafe. He seemed a bit on edge, but was normal in comparison to his younger partner. That young man was clearly shaken. It didn't say more than a quiet yes ma'am or no ma'am to my mom. He kept his attention on the cup of coffee he cradled in his shaking hands. As the old trucker and the others conversated, he brought up a particular event that had happened to them that afternoon. They had crested the Passamaquoddy Pass and were coming down into a little lost valley. As they approached Barney Hot Springs, standing in the middle of the road was what looked to be a child. Bringing the truck to a stop, they soon realized in horror and fascination what was before them. It was not a child, but an odd, humanoid creature. Its body was slim, with long, slender limbs, and its squat little torso. The head and eyes were large and amphibian-like. It was not standing any taller than a preschooler. They could see its green skin shimmer in the brilliant midday sun, dripping with water. It was clutching a large bundle of what could only be described as hundreds of eggs. The creature watched the truck come to a stop, then awkwardly walked over the rest of the road and down the embankment. It was obvious from the trail of water it left behind that it had just come from Barney Hot Springs. On the other side of the road was a small stream hidden in dense willow bushes. No sooner had the creature disappeared. The two truckers were driving away as fast as their Cummins engine would take them. My mom and a few regulars at the cafe took in the man's story with silent, somber expressions and comforting head nods. This wasn't the first time strange things had been witnessed in this little lost valley. Of course, a frogman carrying his brood certainly was the most unique story they had heard in a very long time. The regulars told the trucker not to get too worked up over the incident, as it could have been the autumn sun playing tricks on their eyes. The reassurance seemed to calm the men. They finished their coffee and in a few quick gulps and headed out the door. My mom and the regulars had a good chuckle over the men's story and went on with their day. The following morning, on October 28th, one of the largest earthquakes ever recorded in Idaho struck the area. The Bora Peak earthquake was a magnitude 7.5 and could be felt hundreds of miles away. It destroyed farm infrastructure, roads, and bridges. It even killed two children on their way to school when a brick building in Chalice, Idaho collapsed on top of them. It was a horrific and frightening day for everyone in Idaho. Barney Hot Springs was not far from the earthquake's epicenter and did not escape its wrath. A couple passing visitors near the springs that morning watched in amazement as the waters drained into the earth, leaving behind a stinking, mucky hole. Minutes later, to their further astonishment, the water came splashing back into the depression, but was now boiling hot. It was a truly bizarre geological event to see. The boiling stopped immediately after the earthquake ceased and the water at Barney's quickly cooled. It's now more of a warm springs, having permanently lost about 15 degrees of temperature after the earthquake. The Frogman has been seen a handful of times since that initial sighting, always near Barney's and almost always standing in the road. I like to think the Frogman was just a dotting parent getting their babies out of harm's way before the earthquake struck and annihilated anything and everything in the hot springs. Barney Hot Springs is still a wildly popular spot for the locals. No one seems too bothered by the idea of sharing the water with a little odd amphibian man and his family. Someone even reintroduced the tropical fish after the boiling incident killed all of them. It remains just one of many weird stories to come out of the Lost Rivers area of Idaho, where I grew up. My encounter happened in February of 2007. I used to work third shift at a paper stock factory warehouse. The main day shift supervisor was on vacation, so our boss on night shift decided she wanted to leave early. So she let us sneak off about 2 hours earlier than our normal shift in time. So this would have been between 4:30 and 5 a.m. I was following a coworker down this county road as the warehouse was on the outskirts of a small rural town. I noticed he hit his brakes and proceeded to swerve off the road. I'm probably 1,000 inches behind him and I'm thinking to myself, what the heck is this guy doing? And that's when I saw it. There was a tall, dark shape strolling down the middle of the road in a hunched over and swaying side to side sort of manner. I have linked it to how one of those tall windblower figures you see swaying at a car dealership or Something like that moved. Very unnatural movements. I can't do it justice by describing it, as it would only really make sense if someone saw it themselves, I feel like. It looked like a tall person wrapped in a large, dark blanket or cloak. I had to hit the brakes and swerve too, but I came to a full stop. Whatever it was, I couldn't make out any features or characteristics. I saw a large torso with 2 legs. The upper half was hunched forward as if it was leaning like an older person would with a walker. Now, at the time, I was driving a 1998 Ford Explorer, and I've looked up the height of the vehicle, and it lists it at around 6 feet 7 inches. But whatever walked past my driver's window was a good foot or more higher than that, leaning forward. So I believe whatever was walking was over 7 feet tall, minimum. Again, I could not see ahead. Any arms, just a figure with legs walking. My taillights illuminated it as I started to drive past it. I couldn't make out any definite details for the body. I didn't see fur, skin, or anything like clothing. It was solid. Not like a translucent type of thing, it was just large. It was thick and black, or at the very least dark gray in color. My coworker had pulled over into the parking lot a little ways down the road, and I followed him in, and you could tell he was scared. He was saying something along the lines of, "What was that? It didn't have a head." Among a lot of other things most panicked people say. We decided to drive back down and try to see if it was still there, and what it actually is. I drove in front and he was following behind. We came up to the general area and I noticed there's a large black animal lying in the middle of the road. It appeared to be a big black dog. Part of me knew this wasn't large enough to be what was walking in the road, but we had enough to stop because it was directly in the middle of the roadway anyway. I decided to get out and walk up to it, all the while my coworkers yelling at me to get back in my vehicle. As I approach whatever is laying in the road, it brings its head up and looks back at me. Its eyes are glowing yellow, which I write off as eye shine from the headlights, but it growls at me. So I stop dead in my tracks and just watch. This thing stands up on its back legs like a person, but falls back down. It sits back up and hobbles off to the side of the road like a wounded animal that wasn't able to use its front legs. It looked like your typical German Shepherd, wolf type face, but its fur was puffy like a chow dog's. It was a lot bigger than most dogs, but still nowhere as tall as whatever was walking down the road. I didn't see any blood or wounds, so I can't say if it was actually hurt or not. My coworker just got out of his car by this point, after it had disappeared into the woodline. We discussed what the heck just happened, but while we were talking, I noticed next to our feet was a mouse. It was just standing there with us, but it was cleaning itself. I nudged it off with my shoe and it just kept cleaning its face, as if it wasn't afraid of us. The mouse was sitting in the upright position, as in it was on its hind legs and using its front paws to wipe itself. I never really considered it until recently that all 3 of these bizarre happenings was all on 2 legs. We got back in vehicles and drove off, and then the next time at work, I had mentioned what happened, and our coworkers laughed at us. So the other guy who saw it told me if I don't stop talking about it, he's just going to deny it, and I best just forget about it. So, for essentially 15 years, I never told anyone up until recently. I have tried to rationalize it into something that makes sense, but even then it doesn't completely add up. I have tried to explain it in a way that it was just a large dog that must have gotten hit by another vehicle before my coworker and I got there. Maybe it was messing around with the mouse, and it got hit, which broke its front legs, so that's why it was trying to use its back ones. The mouse was traumatized from the dog trying to mess with it, so it was just standing there cleaning the dog slobber off of itself. That sounds at least plausible, until the original thing we saw walking without a head. The dog was nowhere as tall as that thing was, so even with the dog standing upright, it was close to 6 feet roughly, but whatever was walking had to have been over 7 feet tall, as it was much taller than my Explorer, even with it hunched forward. I can explain away the dog and mouse, but I can't just explain what that was. So I'm back at square one trying to understand what it could have possibly been. As someone who's always been very skeptical, it becomes very hard to accept the unacceptable. I've always been interested in weird creatures and such, but I never truly believed they existed. I still struggle to believe that all of these crazy stories could be true. And yet, who am I to say they aren't? Especially with the weird crap that my former coworker and I went through that night. All I know is what I saw, but whatever I saw is something I don't know and probably never will. It sounds crazy, and I personally wouldn't be hesitant to believe it if someone else had told me that this happened to them. But that's what happened. It was September in central Idaho. Autumn had come to the mountains, and with it, bow hunters, looking for mountain goats. My cousin, let's call him Vern for anonymity's sake, is an avid hunter. He's been all over North America hunting various game: bears in Alaska, wild hogs in Texas, bighorn sheep in Wyoming. But his favorite hunting area was the Lemmy Mountain Range in central Idaho. Our extended family has been hunting in those mountains for generations. We know every river bottom and mountain peak like many people know their own neighborhoods. Mountain goats are a fascinating animal to hunt. They live well above the tree line in rocky environments. They are sure-footed and can climb near vertical slopes. Hunting these animals requires one to venture into these dangerous areas. You have to be mindful as you pursue an animal like that. One wrong step on a rocky slope or one loose rock could mean you're not going home ever again. Vern was an expert mountain hunter. It's something he was born to do. Vern decided to hunt in the Hayden River area of the Lemmies. It's a familiar spot to most locals, and the area is home to plenty of mountain goats. The first mile of Vern's hike was uneventful. As he climbed up the canyon, the air was crisp, and his breath formed in great plumes as he progressed. The sun was just peeking over the mountains when Vern came to a small deer trail. He decided it might be a nice shortcut from his usual route and took it. A few hundred feet up the trail, he saw something odd pop out from behind a tree. It was a man. He was dressed in a light denim coat and jeans and was carrying a small backpack. My cousin stopped for a second to get his bearings. Unsure of where this guy came from, the man waved at him with both arms. One of them was holding an older style hunting bow. Acknowledging him, Vern waved back. Although the man looked to be physically fine, it was clear he was emotionally distressed. He yelled out something my cousin couldn't quite hear and waved his arm, indicating my cousin should follow him. Vern didn't get any bad vibes from this man and could tell he was genuinely in need of some help. He began to make his way up the canyon, following this mystery man. Vern could never gain any ground on this guy. He was always just far enough away that he couldn't talk to him. Periodically, the man would stop, turn towards him to make sure Vern was still following. Every time he looked back, Vern could see the worry on his face. My cousin did his best to remain calm and keep a smile on his face, unsure who or what he was being led to. It was peculiar. Vern thought as he hiked. He hadn't seen any other vehicles on his drive up to the trailhead. Perhaps he came in from over another ridge, which he could possibly be leading him to. He figured one of his hunting party had been hurt and needed help. Of course, he wouldn't have had to speculate if the man would just stop and talk to him for 5 minutes. Vern lost sight of this guy just past a turn in the trail. The trail opened up into an incredibly steep, rocky, talus slope. He looked in every direction and could not locate the man when he heard a whistle. Looking up, he saw the guy about 500 feet up the rocky slope waving at him. There was no possible way he could have gone up that far in just that short amount of time. He still didn't feel any fear or weariness about this weird situation. The man was waving more frantically now, practically begging Vern to follow him up this slope. With a sigh and a grunt, he started up the rocks. It was slow going. Every other step caused a mini rock slide and would cause him to continually lose his footing. Huffing and puffing on the cool, thin air, my cousin eventually made it to a small landing. It had taken him almost 45 minutes to get to that spot where he saw the man from below. There was no earthly way anyone could have done that scramble up that hill any faster. Totally exhausted and out of breath, Vern sat down on the stone landing. He looked around and couldn't see any man anywhere. As he scanned his surroundings, he saw something odd poking out of a boulder about 20 feet away from him. Walking over to it, he found a weathered boot. 2 boots, actually. Inside those boots and under the boulder as well were bones. Vern looked around once again for the man, but he never saw him again. Instead of feeling eerie or unnerving, Vern felt a sense of relief wash over him. These emotions were not his own. What he felt seemed to have come from all around him. He marked the spot with his GPS and decided to make his way down and call the authorities. The Lemhi County Sheriff's Office responded, and he led them up the canyon to the body. It took 4 men to push the boulder out of the way, and when they did, they found the skeletonized remains of a man. On the body, they found hunting equipment and some personal effects. From a credit card in the wallet, they were able to identify this man. He was a bow hunter that had gone missing almost exactly 53 years beforehand. Vern never wanted to be identified to the public or the missing hunter's family. He didn't want the recognition for something like that. To him, it was just one of those bizarre mountain stories. He was happy that the family got closure, even if it was half a century later. The only thing that bothered him was the man leading him up the canyon. And with his strange and sudden disappearance, he had mentioned the waving man to the sheriff, but was brushed off. When news reports came out announcing the discovery, several photos of the man were published. Vern was absolutely shocked when he saw them. In the photos was the man that had been leading him up the mountain to the body. It finally made sense to him. The man's distressful look, the constant checking if Vern was following him, the sense of relief he felt when the body was discovered. That man was desperate to get home, and through Vern, he was able to finally be reunited with his family. Hi everyone. I wanted to share an odd experience that happened more or less than 2 months ago. Disclaimer: I've never believed in ghosts, and I still can't tell whether to believe in such things or not, but this thing is absolutely unexplainable. I was on holiday in my apartment, which belonged to my grandmother's brother. in northern Italy with my dad, just the two of us. We were calmly chilling on the sofa during the evening, minding our own business and watching TV, when out of nowhere, a very old brandy bottle flew from the kitchen shelf and crashed violently against the wall on the other side of the dining room. The bottle crossed the entire room within 2 minutes, crashing into a lot of pieces. My dad and I saw the entire thing and couldn't believe or rationalize what we've just seen, because the bottle has been there for years, and it was, well, put on the shelf. It wasn't tilted out of balance. Since the bottle was brandy, it was impossible that it exploded. It wasn't soda. Even if the bottle were put in a non-stable way, it should have gone down perpendicularly. The bottle crossed the room and crashed violently against the wall. It seemed as if it was launched by someone. We began to try and rationalize, but nothing made any sense. We thought about possible poltergeists. Maybe it could have been my grandma's brother. I never knew him. Or maybe my mom, who passed a few years ago. I've been wrapping my head around this for a while now, but haven't had any other experiences. If anyone can relate, it would be nice to hear from him or her. I have had ghost and spirit experiences for almost 10 years now. I have had so many stories I could share, but I'll share my first one that kind of opened my eyes to ghosts. This setup is a extremely cliche picture. It's Friday the 13th, a group of teenagers at a graveyard at night, setting the scene perfectly, right? So we decided to play hide and seek. I was left alone and I was walking through this creepy graveyard. I got this super intense feeling that someone was following me and eyes were on me. I turned around and of course, no one is there. And I'm calling out for my friends, but there's truly no one around. I'm getting that prickly feeling like someone is watching me. All of a sudden, I see the shape of a girl in the shadows and she's coming towards me. It was just an outline, and I see her coming closer. It was less of seeing a ghost and more feeling this presence near me. Safe to say, I ran away, and I never went back there. When I was about 16, I had a strange occurrence that I still think about from time to time and cannot explain. Growing up, I lived in South Texas where the summers are brutal. The temperature easily gets up to 100 degrees every day from June through August. Our AC was always a problem, and it was only a matter of time before it broke. It was early evening one hot day when it finally did. My parents couldn't either afford or find an emergency repairman to come fix it, so they decided we would go to a hotel. I remember talking to my girlfriend on the landline. This was just before cell phones became mainstream, and telling her I wouldn't be able to talk to her because we were leaving for a hotel. I had no idea which one we were going to at all. I just knew we weren't going to stay at home in the heat. We ended up at one of those oldest motels in town. I'm talking damn near historic. It was single level and had outdated carpets, curtains, furniture, you name it. It was certainly a vibe. Once settled into the room, we were divided. My parents on one bed, and my two younger brothers and me in another. I don't remember what time it was, but we were all on the verge or just about to fall asleep when the phone rang. I'm guessing between 11 p.m. and midnight. It woke us all up and my mom answered. I heard a startled sound in her voice say, "No, he's not." Her voice changed to a more aggressive tone, and she exclaimed, "He's not here," and hung up the phone. She asked if I told anyone where we had gone, and I told her I had not. Keep in mind, I didn't know the hotel we were going to, and it wasn't a chain hotel at all for me to even guess. Additionally, I wouldn't have known what room we were destined for, and the room wasn't in my name. My mom and I didn't even share the same last name. I had no cell phone because it wasn't a thing. I was completely anonymous to anyone here. She told me the person on the other line sounded like a male trying to sound like a female, asking if I was there and if they could talk to me. It still creeps me out to this day, and I have no idea who or what it could have been. I have lived in this New York apartment for like 10 years now, and nothing spooky has ever happened. Well, except that one time I thought I saw a shadow shifting around in my living room. But I want to pretend that was just my eye messing with me. Anyway, before I say what happened, I will give a quick description of the scenery. When you enter my apartment, there is a hallway, and down the hallway is the entrance to the bathroom on the left, and the entrance to my bedroom is on the right. I leave my bedroom door open during the summer to let cool air in, so I can have a visual and can hear if anyone is in the hallway. Anyway, last week while I was using the bathroom, I was trying to calm my cat down from howling away outside the door, and then all of a sudden, I hear rapid knocking on the bathroom door, and my cat stops meowing. And as the knocking continues, I yell frustrated, because I think it could be my family trying to rush me in the bathroom. So I say, "Hello? What do you want?" And no one answered. And usually my family always answers back, but I got nothing, and it continues, and then stops. When I budge the door a bit, I quickly finish up and burst the door open expecting someone, and no one was there. I then go and interrogate everyone in the house, but it was pretty obvious they did not do it. Plus, our floors are pretty creaky, so I could have heard someone coming towards the door and leaving. Also, I noticed my cat was acting a bit weird after that. Like when he was in the room, he just kept staring at the hallway. Fast forward to today and this morning, and my cat is in the hallway. He yelps like he was spooked or hurt, and from the corner of my eye, I see him jump. I thought maybe it could have just been my other cat messing with him, but I noticed she was asleep right next to me on my bed. Very odd, but whatever. Now just an hour ago, my boyfriend goes to use the bathroom, and a few minutes later, my plug on my fan randomly goes off, and I hear some noises, but I think it's just my family moving. My boyfriend comes out, sits on the bed, and then asks me if I just knocked on the door, and no, I did not. I was chilling on my bed trying to not be spooked about my fan going off and then coming back on. I don't know why this is happening and what it means necessarily, but I'm trying to ignore it. But now, I want to know what you guys think, because when I heard the knocks, it felt like someone was using their knuckles, but now my boyfriend heard it too. When I was 18, I became roommates with two sisters who I worked with at the time, and one of their boyfriends lived there too. There was also a cat in the house who wore a collar with a little bell on it. They put the bell on it because the cat was so quiet they could never tell where she was. When I first moved in, they told me I got the haunted room. We were all pretty young, so I tried to brush it off just as a silly joke. But I soon found out it was not a freaking joke. Maybe it was the fact that I was very lonely, and depressed from being newly single, young, and all on my own. But I never felt comfortable in the room or in that house. Just really weird and also hella scared when I was there alone. I was always looking over my shoulder, and I felt like someone was watching me. I also thought I heard things like movement or something, but always just chalked it up to me being paranoid or jumpy. Pretty soon after I moved in, the sister who didn't have the boyfriend moved out. It was a 3-bedroom house, and since that girl moved out, I moved out of my small room and into her master room. That room was even worse. Besides the house not having hot water because they didn't want a gas bill or whatever, the bathroom in that room didn't even have electricity. I don't know why, but I was told the sister who moved out broke it somehow. I was young and very naive, so whatever. I'd take my cold showers by candlelight, didn't provide any light at all, and sometimes I'd boil water to have a hot shower, and I'd be filled with fear every time I was in that bathroom. Like if I had to pee, I'd run to and from the toilet. To be honest, I don't even remember going to the bathroom in there, if I could even be in there that long. Sometimes when I couldn't sleep, I would sit on my bed hugging my legs and stare at the dark bathroom door way across the room. I could never stretch my legs out. I'd always ball up like a dead spider. Also, the head of my bed was against the wall right next to my main room door, so if I'd sit on my bed, the door is directly to my right on the same wall. Okay, so one night the remaining 2 roommates and their cat went to go sleep over at a family member's house, and I was there all alone. I made sure all the doors were locked. I had my laptop with Netflix and a big bottle of cheap vodka the roommates gave me. They had confiscated it from a younger sibling who shouldn't have had it at all. And I was trying to just get through the night with all my sanity, because I'm a big scaredy cat. I couldn't wait until daylight. Like that paranoid, hot, under the blankets and can't breathe, clammy hands and feet vibe. Those are the longest nights, the worst. So I'm sitting there minding my own business and actually starting to chill out watching some show in bed and sipping on some battery acid vodka. The rest of the house is pretty silent. I'm feeling good considering my situation. Then, coming from the bathroom, I hear a cat bell. It sounded exactly like my roommate's freaking cat moving around. I immediately jump up like a dog who hears a package being delivered. If I had dog ears, they would have pointed straight to the fucking ceiling and popped off in my head and ran away. Okay, so I'm alone. I'm already scared. I've been drinking vodka, and I just feel like I'm a little crazy. And then all of a sudden, I hear the sound of the jingle that comes from the bell. It came from the same area. I heard it again, clear as day, and I sobered up in half a millisecond. My heart was pounding. I was so sweaty, and I was alone. The house had 2 bathrooms, one in my room with no electricity, and one down the short hallway with electricity. So I jumped up and sprinted my little body into that lighted bathroom so fast I basically teleported there. I shut that door and I locked it and sat on the toilet. I didn't know what to do. And I heard it again, outside the bathroom door, this time with accompanying footsteps. They sounded clear and echoey, like men's dress shoes or boots on tile. Slow. It was straight up like a horror movie, where the person is staring at the bottom of the door, and they hear someone coming, and then they see a shadow under the door. Like, I can't emphasize enough that there's no sound in this house, and I heard these clear enough to where I could doubt myself and then reconfirm I actually heard it, because I would hear it again. And the bell. I knew the bell. I heard it every day, and it was that exact same cat bell. I felt like the sound was being used to taunt me, like the thing knew that I knew I was alone, and I knew the cat was gone. I even called my roommate and made sure she took the cat. So, what did I do next? Once I stopped hearing the noises for a bit, I finally decided to sprint to my old room, the original haunted room, and I hid under the covers and didn't look out. I tried to fall asleep, and eventually did. And you know what? I woke up to somebody calling my name from the hallway asking where I was. I asked him how he got in here and why he didn't call me first. He said his friend dropped him off and he didn't call because he wanted to see if I was home or if I was out with someone. And he said that he walked in because the front door was unlocked. I knew I locked that fucking door. I made sure. I was so confused and scared, but also so relieved that another human was there with me. And this last part, I really feel like it happened, but I'm still a little iffy if I dreamed it or not. But a few seconds before I saw my friend in that hallway, I swear I saw a fat floating green orb in the hallway, and it floated into my room. Like I said, I'm not sure about that part, but it stuck with me, and I like to think it gave my ex a gentle push to my house that night, because he never showed up randomly like that without calling or texting first, and he only did that one time. Let's just say I moved out shortly after that. I'm happy to say my life is very chill and happy now, and I have a wonderful partner. This story happened like a decade ago, but I'll never forget it. Now it's almost 4 a.m. and I don't want to get up to go to the bathroom. Thank you everyone for listening. If your story was told, I'm glad I'm the one who could tell it. I appreciate all the love and support, and please don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe. I hope you enjoyed today's stories as much as I did reading them.